If you think the more expensive a Tesla battery is, the longer it will last, this data could make you think again. After 100,000 kilometers, the Model 3 with a CATL LFP battery still retains 93.34% of its original capacity. This puts Tesla's new LFP battery among the battery packs with very strong resistance to degradation in real-world data. So, could what Tesla once viewed as a cost-saving solution actually be the smarter choice for long-term users? The data comes from 9,954 real-world battery tests conducted in Sweden between 2022 and 2026. The tests were analyzed by Carla, a Swedish used EV retailer, using Avalu's battery diagnostic system. Instead of relying on the range number displayed on the dashboard, the system measures the actual condition of the battery pack. That makes the results much more useful for understanding what happens to Tesla batteries after serious mileage. Once the Model 3 results are separated by battery chemistry, the difference becomes clear. After vehicles passed approximately 62,000 miles or 100,000 kilometers, Tesla Model 3 vehicles equipped with CATL's LFP battery retained an average of 93.3% of their original capacity. The LG Chem NMC version averaged 91.5%, while Panasonic's NCA batteries averaged 89.8% for the 77.8 kilowatt-hour pack and 88.2% for the 52.4 kilowatt-hour pack. That creates a difference of more than 5 percentage points between the strongest and weakest battery configurations. All of these batteries were used in the same basic Model 3 platform, yet their long-term capacity retention was not the same. The result becomes even more interesting because the LFP battery, generally associated with lower cost and lower energy density, produced the highest average battery health figure in this dataset. The reason has a lot to do with chemistry. LFP batteries are generally more tolerant of high states of charge and can handle frequent charging toward 100% better than many nickel-based batteries. Tesla commonly recommends lower daily charge limits for its nickel-based packs, often around 80 to 90%, depending on the specific vehicle and battery. That difference may seem small during a single charging session, but over thousands of cycles, the way a battery spends its time at high charge levels can influence long-term capacity retention. The larger picture becomes even more interesting when the Tesla results are compared with fleet data. Geotab analyzed more than 22,700 electric vehicles and found average battery degradation of approximately 1.8% per year. That does not mean every battery loses exactly 1.8% annually, because real-world degradation depends on mileage, climate, charging behavior, temperature, battery chemistry, and thermal management. But the overall pattern shows that battery capacity tends to decline gradually rather than suddenly disappearing at a specific age. Tesla's own reported figures provide another important reference. The company has stated that Model 3 and Model Y long-range batteries lose approximately 15% of their original capacity after 200,000 miles. If a vehicle originally achieved 300 miles under comparable conditions, retaining 85% of its original battery capacity would correspond to approximately 255 miles. After more than 300,000 kilometers, that would still represent substantial usable range. This also explains why mileage and age alone cannot tell the full story. Two Tesla vehicles built in the same year can have very different battery health. One may have spent years in a hot climate and frequently remained at a high state of charge, while another may have operated under milder conditions and followed more conservative charging habits. The battery chemistry itself can create another difference. For used Tesla buyers, that change is what deserves the most attention. Instead of assuming that an 8-year-old battery is approaching the end of its life, the more useful question is how much capacity the battery actually retains today. A Model 3 with 100,000 or 200,000 kilometers does not automatically mean a battery replacement is approaching. The condition of the pack matters far more than the number printed on the odometer. And there is one final number that puts all of this into perspective: 93.3%. That is the average battery health recorded for the CATL LFP Model 3S after roughly 100,000 kilometers in this dataset. The battery had aged, but most of its original capacity remained. That suggests the real story of Tesla battery longevity is not about a sudden endpoint. It is about a slow transition from 100% capacity to something lower while the vehicle continues doing the same job. The bigger question then is no longer simply how many years a Tesla battery can survive. It is how much useful capacity remains after the car has traveled hundreds of thousands of kilometers. and the latest real-world numbers suggest that for many Tesla batteries the answer could be far higher than expected. But if battery age itself is not the main factor, then what actually makes a Tesla battery lose capacity faster? The answer is more complicated than simply counting how many miles the car has traveled. The battery is constantly responding to temperature, charging power, state of charge, and driving conditions. Change those conditions and the same battery can experience a very different aging process. So here is the first question. Does supercharging actually damage a Tesla battery faster? The answer is not simply yes or no. High-power DC charging does place greater thermal and electrical demands on a battery, especially when the pack is already hot or when charging continues toward a high state of charge. Data from Geotab provides a useful indication of the difference. Vehicles that frequently use DC fast charging above 100 kilowatts showed battery degradation of around 3.0% per year, compared with lower degradation among vehicles that relied more heavily on lower power charging. That does not mean every Tesla using a supercharger will lose 3% every year. It shows that repeated high-power charging can become one of the factors influencing long-term battery aging. But that leads to a more important question. If fast charging matters, why doesn't every Tesla that uses supercharging frequently show the same battery degradation? Because charging power is only one part of the equation. Temperature can completely change the conditions inside the battery. Charging a cold or hot battery is not the same as charging one operating within its preferred temperature range. Tesla's thermal management system therefore becomes an important part of battery longevity. Before a fast charging session, the vehicle can prepare the battery by bringing it toward a more suitable temperature. During charging and driving, the system continues managing heat so the cells do not simply absorb whatever temperature the surrounding conditions create. And temperature is not a minor detail. Geotab's analysis found that EVs operating in hotter climates experienced approximately 0.4 percentage points more degradation per year than vehicles operating in more moderate climates. Over 1 year, that difference may look small. Over 5 or 10 years, however, it can become meaningful. This is especially relevant when high ambient temperatures are combined with heavy driving and repeated high-power charging. Now comes the question that many owners overlook. Is charging to 100% actually worse than using a supercharger? The answer depends heavily on battery chemistry and how long the battery remains at a high state of charge. Lithium-ion cells experience different levels of chemical stress at different charge levels. Spending extended periods close to the upper or lower limits can be more demanding than operating within a moderate range. Geotab found a clearer increase in degradation among vehicles that spent more than 80% of their time at very high or very low states of charge. That is why Tesla does not give every battery the same charging routine. For many nickel-based battery packs, the recommended daily limit is commonly around 80%, while LFP-equipped vehicles can generally be charged to 100% more regularly according to Tesla's guidance for those batteries. The difference is not simply a software setting. It reflects the underlying chemistry and how those cells respond to prolonged high states of charge. This creates a fascinating situation. Imagine 2 Tesla owners driving exactly the same number of kilometers. One regularly charges to a moderate level and begins charging before the battery becomes extremely low. The other repeatedly charges to very high levels and leaves the car sitting for long periods near that level. Their odometers could look almost identical, yet the batteries may age differently. What conditions does your battery experience between charges? This is where the battery management system becomes one of the most important pieces of technology in the entire vehicle. The BMS continuously monitors battery voltage, temperature, charge level, and other operating parameters. It can limit charging power, adjust energy flow, and coordinate with the thermal system when conditions require it. The driver may only see a percentage on the screen, but behind that number is a system constantly making decisions about how aggressively the battery should operate. That also explains why battery chemistry alone cannot tell the entire story. LFP, NMC, and NCA batteries have different characteristics, but the vehicle still has to manage thousands of cells under constantly changing conditions. Temperature, charging power, state of charge, and thermal control determine how those characteristics translate into real-world battery aging. There is another detail that makes this even more important for Tesla owners. Battery stress is cumulative. A single supercharging session or a single day at 100% is not what determines the life of a battery. The important factor is what happens repeatedly over years. Small differences in temperature, charging behavior, and time spent at extreme states of charge can accumulate across thousands of operating cycles. That means there is no single bad habit that suddenly destroys a Tesla battery. Instead, battery aging is the result of many small conditions repeated over a very long period. High-power charging can contribute. Heat can contribute. Prolonged time at extreme charge levels can contribute. Poor thermal conditions can contribute. But the vehicle's software and thermal systems are constantly working to control those variables. And this changes the way battery longevity should be understood. The question is no longer simply whether supercharging is safe or whether charging to 100% is safe. The more useful question is how the battery is being used over its entire life. A Tesla battery is exposed to thousands of charging and driving events, but it does not experience those events equally. The difference between a battery that ages slowly and one that ages faster may come down to something as simple as temperature, charge level, and how long the cells remain under stress. And if Tesla's software and thermal systems can continuously manage those conditions, there is one final question worth asking. Could the technology controlling the battery be just as important to its lifespan as the chemistry inside the cells? That is where the hidden role of Tesla's battery management system becomes the next part of the story. The BMS is essentially the system responsible for keeping the battery within a safe and efficient operating window. It continuously monitors parameters such as cell voltage, temperature, current, and state of charge. But its job goes far beyond simply displaying a battery percentage on the screen. It has to make thousands of decisions about how the battery should charge, discharge, and respond to changing conditions. This becomes especially important when you consider that not every cell inside a battery pack ages at exactly the same rate. Small differences in temperature, resistance, and charge level can cause individual cell groups to behave differently over time. The BMS constantly compares these measurements and can limit charging or power output when conditions become unfavorable.